For 40 years, investigators were trying to identify this young girl who was found murdered in the mountains of Tennessee. She became known as Baby Girl.
They were able to recover multiple skeletal artifacts from the victim, and then they also found a beaded necklace, some pieces of clothing, possibly even a shoe.
They drew a forensic sketch, had an idea of what she might have looked like. They knew where her body was found, and they had DNA. And in spite of all that, they weren't able to figure out who she was. These cases are far more common than most people think. There are tens of thousands of unidentified remains cases that have been unsolved nationwide. 40 years went by, and she was finally identified as Tracy Sue Walker. That was a name nobody had had on their list of potential matches, and it was such a surprise. A lot of times we get the question, with all the clues that are available, why can they not be identified?
Investigators attempted to utilize a forensic artist to try to do a sketch that maybe could be put out to the public in hopes that maybe someone locally would recognize the victim.
Although promising initially, the face was just too general and looked roughly similar to too many other missing girls in the area. There was another idea that perhaps the necklace would be identifying. This was not a mass-produced necklace. It looked like it could have been a handmade necklace. But again, it never triggered a lead. So neither the face nor the necklace were helpful in identifying who she might be. The post-mortem interval was set by investigators as maybe 1 to 4 years.
Dr. Bass was able to date that the remains had been there for possibly 2, 3, 4 years based on insect activity as well as the condition of the remains.
Although post-mortem intervals can be approximate and directionally correct, they're not very specific. And in fact, when we did end up helping identify this girl, she had gone missing in 1978, 7 years before her remains were found. And so there's a good chance that she had died many years earlier. Another idea was the location. It was not an easy to access location. It was kind of off the beaten path in a kind of rugged, isolated area. Perhaps she was local to the area, and whoever harmed her might have been local as well. There was a question throughout the case as to whether perhaps this child was never reported missing. There's this unidentified girl. She doesn't seem to be matching any of the missing girls in the area or in the time period. Maybe she wasn't reported missing. In fact, her family had reported her missing, but it ended up not panning out because in reality, this girl was from Indiana, 400 miles away from where her body was found. In the late 70s and early 80s, there weren't good systems to propagate missing persons records across state lines and throughout the nation. And because she was missing from one state and then later found in another state, it was very difficult to connect the dots in those cases. The lack of communication about the missing person, the distance between where she was missing and where she was found, and then of course the large amount of time that elapsed between when she was found in 1985 and when she had originally gone missing 7 years earlier. All of that contributed to the difficulty in identifying her just based on her missing record alone. The last piece of information that investigators thought would be a way to identify her was DNA. In the 70s and 80s, there wasn't wide use of forensic DNA testing, but certainly more recently it's become a cornerstone of all forensic investigations. And they did DNA testing. They performed DNA testing to build an STR, short tandem repeat profile. They put this profile into CODIS, but there was no match. And the way forensics has worked for decades is that to find somebody, you have to match against something, whether you're matching a shoe to a shoe print, a finger to a fingerprint, or a DNA profile like an STR profile to a known profile in the database. CODIS did not exist when this girl went missing. Although DNA is a powerful tool, when it's constrained by the need for there to be a match, it can be ineffective. And it's especially ineffective for identifying victims. At least you've got a chance with suspects and known offenders. It is much more challenging to identify someone if they're a victim because they're generally not represented in government databases like CODIS.
We just kept hoping for an advancement in technology.
These small differences in what was initially ascertained from the crime scene compounded and created that confusion that made it very hard to connect the dots. At the same time, the evidence was there, her DNA and other details. What was missing was not a lack of interest, not a lack of reporting of her disappearance by family, but rather a lack of technology to tie all these pieces of data together. And that's the power of modern forensic DNA testing.
Once we built the profile for baby girl, that's uploaded to the genealogical database that is consented for law enforcement use. So we upload it to the family tree DNA database and we get hundreds of matches. Our software actually starts to figure out how these matches all relate to one another to very quickly place the unidentified person onto a family tree. And that allows us to call law enforcement and say, your victim belongs to this family unit.
The data that you get from modern DNA forensic testing is very certain, as opposed to a lot of the older techniques that bring in ambiguity and uncertainty. And so using very certain methods that are precise and don't require matches enabled investigators to identify distant genetic relatives of Tracy that then, in the combination with public records and genealogy, tied things together and helped investigators narrow in onto the identity of this missing girl. There are so many more cases that are unidentified, and they're one or two certain details away from an identification. There's no lack of trying. Investigators are relentless as they pursue the identities of these people that have been lost through time. But at the same time, there's an accumulation of remains that are not being identified because they're lacking perhaps one or two clues that would get them to an identification state. And so it's really important that we bring this forensic DNA technology, this new modern way of doing forensic DNA testing, to all cases, not just to some of them, because in a lot of cases, a distant relative may be the one thing they need to help tie up the loose ends, connect people through family trees and relationships, and identify these people that have otherwise been lost to time.